Hey everybody, we're living the stream in Brooklyn and you are watching Talkenomics. I'm Adam Shapiro. It's good to have you here. And Anthony Scaramucci, he certainly doesn't need an introduction, but there are a few things you should know about him. He cut his teeth at Goldman Sachs. He co-founded Oscar Capital and then sold it to Neuberger Berman. He is also the founder back in 2005 of Skybridge Capital, which is still in effect right now. He served in the first Trump administration. He was at the White House as communications director. He certainly doesn't need that kind of introduction, but there's something you don't know about him. And I got to witness this in November at an event here in New York City, which was called the Evident AI Symposium. And I think it speaks to Anthony's character. He was talking about the next Trump administration. He was asked a question and he said, it's not about my relationship with Donald Trump. He brought up his wife, the Mooch did, and he said, Donald Trump owes my wife an apology. And what that said to me is that Anthony Scaramucci values the people he cares about. And I knew then I wanted to bring him on to Talkenomics because we're going to talk about all the things people love to talk about with him. But it was that which, it's a side of him I don't think people truly appreciate. So with that, I want to bring Anthony Scaramucci into Talkenomics. It's great to have you here, and I really appreciate your joining us right now. Before I get to the first question, I got to ask you, has your wife gotten that apology from so many years
right.
ago?
Yeah, no, that's never going to happen. So, yeah, look, I mean, he went after her on Twitter while he was president of the United States. It just shows you how declassed he is as a human being. But he's back. This was a malpractice by the Democrats. This was a intergenerational transfer that could have been appropriately handled well over a year ago. But Joe Biden and Lady Macbeth, Jill Biden, they decided that they wanted to cling to power way too long, frankly, and they caused this problem. Should be no reason why he's wreaking havoc on us again. But, Adam, we got 207 more weeks to go. Okay, so we'll have to see what happens over the next 207 weeks. But sort of a ridiculous start to a presidency, frankly. I am amazed that there's no dissent. I'm amazed that the Republicans, smart Republicans, are not dissenting. And I'm amazed that there's no real organized dissent from the Democrats. I feel like you guys, my message to Democrats, you only lost by 1.2%. I mean, come on, guys. You're treating him like if Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan had a baby and it's Donald Trump. I mean, come on, guys. He won by a couple of percent, not even. Fight back.
Yeah. So I want to keep talking with you about Trump because you know him in ways that a lot of people don't. And you don't underestimate him, which I think a lot of people do. And I want to make sure that we get also, because you have an economic background that people want to, pick your brain. You founded the SALT conference, which is coming up in May. We want to talk a little bit about that. I still owe you an apology. Years ago at Yahoo, I never believed crypto would take off, and you corrected me, called me out on air. But we got to stick a little bit with Trump. And one of the things you've pointed out, and I took this from you, is that people do underestimate him. Not too long ago, you talked about the infighting within the White House. You were in Davos when you said this just recently. You talked about the infighting among the Trump people, but then you pointed out that Trump really isn't MAGA. What is it that people miss about him? Because you know him personally.
Well, MAGA is sort of the populist movement. MAGA is lower and middle income people who, frankly, have some justification. They feel left out of the system. Lower and middle income people over the last 30 years haven't really gained anything in terms of real wages. They feel economically desperational. This is a group of people 50 years ago that once felt economically aspirational. But frankly, the system, poor governmental economics, inflation, which is the worst form of regressive taxation, has hurt these people. And, Trump supposedly represents them, but he never does anything for them. So, yes, he provides an outlet for their anger and he shows up at these different rallies. But if you just see his inauguration, he's hanging out with billionaires. He's currying favor with them. He's inviting them to Mar-a-Lago to kiss his ring. He's focused on tax cuts for corporations. Looks like he got paid handsomely to switch his position on TikTok. And so Trump, when I say he's not MAGA, Trump is for Donald Trump. And if it works for Donald Trump, great. I mean, I don't know. Is it MAGA to launch a meme coin 48 hours before you ascend to the most important job in the world, the American presidency? I mean, so So he's not what he says he is. But here's the thing about his followers. They see him as their last hope. They see him as an avatar for their anger, and they'll cling to him. And he said something a few years ago, Adam, which I agree with. He says he could shoot people on Fifth Avenue, and his support base would not diminish at all. It feels that way.
When you say it's working for him, I think the bigger question though is, will it work for the country? Because there are some things. I mean, you're in favor of some of the crypto deregulation that might come with the Trump administration. Overall, will the Trump administration and what happens over the next 4 years work for the country?
Okay, so remember this with Donald Trump. You get the entire buffet table. It's not Trump a la carte. You can't take the positive crypto or maybe the tax cut, or if you like some type of favorable treatment, or if you're in an industry where he's tariffing your international competitors, you may like those selective things in his policy mix, but you get everything. You get the grift, you get the flipping on a dime on something like TikTok, you get the meme coin registration for himself and for Melania Trump, you get the bellicosity of rhetoric. It looks like he stopped payments for Medicaid. I guess the judge just reversed that. He stopped payments for healthcare grants, Medicaid, all different types of spending. And so, listen, you get the whole thing with him. And so my guess is some of these things are positive and some of these things will work out. But a lot of these things are very negative. And one of the things that's negative is the coarseness. So if you're going to be flying people around on military planes, you could deport people on charter planes for $8,500, or you could deport people on military planes for $850,000. And I think he's doing the latter as a form of symbolism and a form of demonstration of American hardness or American cruelty. So I don't like it. I think the American people over time will grind out of that. I don't see them liking it, but maybe I'm wrong. It has polled well, the deportations. If you ask people about deportations, they want them, but I don't know if they necessarily are going to want this sort of gruesome way to handle things. We've got children in inner cities that are hiding, fearful to go to school. I don't know if this is the right message we should be sending to people. This stuff will impact markets, by the way, Adam. Markets don't like fear. Markets don't like uncertainty. So keep it up, and you'll see the markets, correct themselves. And Trump will be like, okay, well, what am I doing?
Well, let me ask you about this, because you're going to get some questions from the guests, and I bet they're going to ask about Trump. But let me ask you about this. Let's talk about markets. I think the S&P 500 up 26% in 2024. It was up 27% in 2023. Now we're in this kind of new year, 2025. Everyone's talking AI. That's where you and I crossed paths again back in November. And where are we headed with this? And could this administration crash the economy? I mean, kill the golden goose?
Well, listen, we got to talk factually. I mean, the economy was heading in the right trajectory. The inflation numbers were coming down. Economic growth relative to the rest of the world was quite strong. The stock market, as you just pointed out, two of the best years in the last 30 for the stock market. So things were trending in the right direction. And could they stay in the right direction? I do think so. I think one of the great ironies of American politics, the economy is situational and cyclical, Adam, but we have a tendency to personalize things that are situational. So if it goes into recession under Trump's watch, it's Donald Trump's recession. If it booms under Donald Trump, it's Donald Trump's boom, when in fact it may have gone into recession or gone into a boom related to general cyclicality in the overall market. So I do think, however, on the margin, the government can impact confidence. The government can impact interest rates. The government could cause a trade war. We know from our economic history that trade wars are very destructive, and they steepen recessionary activity. So there are things that could happen to weaken the economy. I think the economy is strong right now. We've got this AI scare that's taken place as a result of something that China just launched. They're claiming that they've created the same type of chat GBT product for a fraction of the cost of ChatGPT. I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. I mean, it's very hard to get the straight scoop from the Chinese. But
That's
having
true.
said that, I think they stun people because we have blocked some chips. We have blocked some, we've sanctioned them in terms of some export controls on some of the most valuable chips. And it appears from this angle that perhaps they've replicated some of those chips, or they've made similar chips internal in China. And so this speaks to their economic prowess. It speaks to their work ethic and their creativity and engineering ingenuity. And so I think this rocked people because the expectation was that we were way ahead of them in AI, and we're probably not as far ahead as we would like to think. So having said that, I think that sorts itself out in the market. I think ultimately, if Donald Trump pursues a trade war, if Donald Trump is, I guess, going to take Greenland by military force and disavow the treaty that we have, the NATO treaty, and I guess go after Denmark, who's been a ally of ours, I guess, for 150 plus years, and certainly since the end of the Second World War, I think it's going to cause havoc in the society. You know, Adam, unfortunately for you and me, we're getting up there, right? I mean, I'm older than you, and I'll just say this to the younger people that listen to your program. America, when I was a kid in my 20s, traveling in Europe, was incredibly well regarded. America was generally, despite the Vietnam War and some miscues by America, it was generally considered to be a benevolent force in the world, a peacekeeping force, a country that was in the fight with other freedom-loving countries in the Alliance for Western liberal democracies and the Alliance for Freedom. It doesn't feel like that anymore. There's a coarseness and there's a hardening of America that's coming from this leadership. And I don't know if that's going to serve America long term. I think why break something that took 80 years to cultivate, this relationship that America has had with the rest of the world?
Let me do this because I'm going to betray my age. But when we launched Fox Business almost 20 years ago, but back in around 2007, Wall Street Journal had an article, and I've never forgotten this. It was the first time ever, and it was 2007, 2008 when this article came out, that for the first time ever, Republicans, a majority of Republicans, were now opposed to free trade. I want to take a quick 1-minute break, Anthony, and when we come back, we're going to take some questions from the audience, because I know people want to keep talking about Trump. They also want to get your input on crypto. So let's take a break, and we'll be right back in 60 seconds. All right, welcome back to Talkenomics. I'm Adam Shapiro. We're joined tonight by Anthony Scaramucci. And Mooch, I got to tell you, I promised my big brother the first question, my big brother Danny. I do believe in nepotism. So, Danny, come on into the program.
Most people do, Danny. Most people do.
Well, listen, I'm all about family, Mooch. And when I got to tell you, you really blew me away in November. I took a picture of you at that event, and it really resonated with me. But let's get to the question.
Well, you got to take care of your family. So who does your mom think is better looking, Danny? I'll start with the first.
Oh, Adam, no question.
By definitely me.
No question.
Wow, I mean, that was a fast answer. Okay.
Oh, I know the answer.
Danny, you're up.
So, Mr. Scaramucci, you already mentioned the coarseness and how you have to take the whole smorgasbord. You can't pick and choose from what's being served. Recently, with the shut off of the grant money, and specifically the harm to Medicaid. Um, where's the pain point? I mean, the Atlantic had an article about how tech billionaires are influencing how democracy functions. If we've got on one side all of the social media telling us we shouldn't be upset that our Medicaid was taken away, and yet it's still going away. I mean, where do you see the pain point? How do you think this ends? Where do you think the outrage comes from?
Well, I mean, it has to end with some level of organized resistance and organized dissent. I think that the opposing parties, and this could be longstanding Republicans that oppose Donald Trump or Democrats that oppose Donald Trump, I think they have to get more organized. I think if we're being brutally honest on this program, and I'm certain that Adam would like me to be, the hard left flank of the Democratic Party has really hurt the Democrats. And I think that when you do the exit polling, the hard left and the wokeness and the pronoun usage and the constant scolding and the diminishment of American white males and the constant harassing and threat to cancel somebody immediately if they say something inappropriate or untoward, I think has grown very tiresome for the society. And I think that at the end of the day, that's been the stumbling block, because the dissent is organized, but they're trying to figure out how to deal with their hard left flank, which is a complete and total disarray. And so I predict that there will be a galvanizing leader that comes forth and gets people together and says, okay, listen, this is not what America really is. This is not what got us here. We're the largest economy. It's interesting, because I've studied this. Since 1985 to today, we're roughly 4% of the world's population and roughly 25% of the global output. I just want you guys to think about that. Over the last 40 years, there have been rising living standards from all over the world, yet the United States has maintained its military presence and its economic superiority, and yet always was couched in some level of fairness, some level of peacekeeping, some level of alliance and NATO alliance sort of cohabitation, if you will, this sort of bilateralism with other Western liberal democracies. And so he's challenging all of that. And so if he breaks it and it keeps going in the direction it's going, I mean, we've only seen this now for, I guess, 8 days. If he continues down this direction, I do think he'll break it. And I don't think anything on social media or any propaganda-based messaging is going to stop people from being dissatisfied. So you've got people that are losing their jobs now. You've got poor people that have got their kids trying to get services from a hospital or chemotherapy, God forbid, and their Medicaid funding has been cut by Donald Trump. I don't know. It doesn't sound like the country that you and I want to live in. It doesn't sound like the country that most people want to live in. So why is he doing this? He's taking a position that the government is overspent. The government's got ahead of itself. And if you go back to 2019, the government was spending $4.5 trillion. It's spending $7 trillion now. So this is the irony with Trump. There's elements of truth in what he's saying, but the abruptness and the way he's handling it is totally inappropriate. We could go to the American people with a guidance system. We could say to the American people, okay, look, this is what happened during COVID. This is why the spending increased. This is why we got to get the spending down. I'm for, believe it or not, some of the tariffs. I think we have to protect American workers. If the Chinese are teaming up with their private companies to produce below manufacturing costs goods and services and dump them into our market, then we do have to have a protection for that, because we're not doing that for our companies. And so there are surgical tariffs that make sense. Wildly blanketed tariffs do not make sense. It'll touch off a trade war. So again, just to finish up, two more sentences. They're in disarray, the opposition. They've got to come together. A couple more weeks like this, I think you'll see a rise of that leadership.
Hey, Danny, I'll say hi to Mom for you. And Johnny's the one she loves most. I think he's the best.
I mean, I don't know. It sounds like Danny sounds like Adam's numero uno. Like when you play Uno.
We'll see. I got to get to the other guests, but thank you, big brother. I kept my promise. Okay, who else do we have coming in on here? I believe Betsy is joining us. Betsy, are you here from New York? Go ahead, Betsy, you're on.
Hi, Betsy.
The election was close, and I realized that big changes can happen. What does it say about the people who vote that this can happen? Do they know this can happen? Do they not know that?
Well, I think the problem with Donald Trump, it's a little bit like a kaleidoscope, Betsy. When you look at Trump, and I'll speak for myself, because when I was supporting him in 2016, when I looked into the lens of the kaleidoscope, I saw a 70-year-old leader who could be post-partisan and transformational. We didn't get that. And I think what ends up happening is people look at him, and like I said about this buffet table, they see certain things that they like, and then they forget, well, if you like that, you're going to have to accept this, or these other things that he's doing that are potentially damaging or treacherous. And so ultimately, this has been a malpractice by the political establishment, if I'm just being brutally honest. Joe Biden bested him in 2020 quite handily. Joe Biden, by anybody's measure, and I'm not a clinically trained neurologist or anything like that, but you don't have to be. In other words, if like someone breaks their leg and the bone is sticking out and it's on a football field, you don't have to be an orthopedic surgeon to know that someone has a broken bone. Joe Biden in that debate looked cognitively impaired. He didn't look like he was up for the presidency. We're learning post-campaign about all the different things that they were doing that they were hiding from the American people, which I think was another sign of malpractice and a breach of fiduciary responsibility. But you could have put up a primary process in the United States. Joe Biden could have said in September of 23, I've been a good steward here, but I'm too old to run again. Let's have a formal primary process. Let me step out of the way. And he failed to do that. By the way, you could have left Bobby Kennedy in there in that process. He probably wouldn't have won the process, but at least he would have stayed as a Democrat. So you blocked all the primary the Democrats are saying, well, Trump is a threat to democracy. Okay. And he probably is. But then why are you blocking primaries? Why are you not having a New Hampshire primary? Why are you doing certain things to anoint Joe Biden as opposed to what has been done over the last 100 or so years of the primary process? So to me, it was a narrow victory. Had the Democrats fielded a candidate, and if Kamala Harris had won, frankly, but she had campaigned for a year, which is normal, she would have had more money, more skills, a much broader net that she could have casted into the American public to run against Donald Trump. And so, again, whether it was her or you pick a candidate that floated to the top of that primary process, he could have been easily beaten. And I don't know, he's not well liked. Even people that have voted for him, when you look at the crosstabs, they don't necessarily like him. And so this is one of the big ironies here. He's got his chest out. He's thrusting into the marketplace like he's won this big mandate, like he's Ronald Reagan in 1984, where he run a 49-state mandate. He doesn't have that. He's a sliver ahead in the House of Representatives with one representative. He's a few senators ahead in the Senate, but some of those senators didn't vote for Hegseth. Some of those senators are not following him. He could easily slip into the minority in the House and Senate in the 2026 election. So I guess what I would say as a potential football coach for the Democrats, wake up. The game is not over. You lost a close one there, but there's another game coming this Sunday. We got to get ready for it and stop whining and coalesce around each other, come up with a good thread and a good narrative and beat the pants off this guy and the people that he represents.
Hey, Betsy, thank you for your question. We want to get to the next person who's going to be asking the Mooch a question. Alfonso, you're up. What do you want to ask him?
Proud founding member of The Rest is Politics.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for listening to the podcast.
Absolutely love that. Me and Adam used to work together at Yield Street, where we lasted for about 20 Scaramuccis.
Okay. Well, that's 19 more Scaramuccis than I lasted in the White House, Alfonso.
Here's my question. I want to talk macro, Anthony. So Trump seems to love government intervention in the economy, pressure on the Fed, expansive fiscal policy. So my question is, first of all, do you believe his economic vision to be more similar to a dirigist European government from the 70s, minus the taxes, of course, than to pure Reaganism? And if so, do you see his popularity as a sign that this type of policy has become almost a necessity given where the world is going with the end of globalization or competition between large state actors?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really good question. And I think the first statement I would like to make is the establishment politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, took certain things for granted. They took the advent of globalization, the negative consequences of globalization, and they took the idea of the footprint of NATO and the forces for democracy for granted. And we had a breach. And unfortunately, whether it was in the United Kingdom, Italy, France, the United States, there's been a systemic rise of populism. And where does populism usually come from? It comes from three things that happen. Number one, we lose our living memory of wartime. Barbara Tuchman would tell you that in The Guns of August. Once you lose the living memory of wartime, people glorify war. They become more bellicose in their rhetoric, and they become more nationalistic. This is a book that I always recommend to people, The Guns of August. Number two, it's a very large group of middle and lower income people, because of the decisions to not have a stable currency, but to have a monetizing currency. And let me just explain that to people quickly. The United States, when I was growing up, 1971, it was $35 per 1 ounce of gold, and we were tied to that, and that put pressure on the government to stay consistent with their currency. When they started to float the currency, they started spending a lot of money, and they said, okay, well, we can spend the money, no problem. We'll just print the money to pay the money back. And so we touched off a spiral of inflation in the early 70s. It went into the 80s. It got tamer in the 90s. But if you really look at it over a 52-year period of time, or now almost 53 years, you've got $35 an ounce in 1971. You have $3,000 an ounce in 2024. And that is horrific. That means that the purchasing power of your money, $100 bill today, is like worth two 1971 dollars. And if you have assets, no problem. Your assets went up pursuant to the fiat currency in terms of the nominal value. But if you're a worker, you got absolutely destroyed, because if you were making $1,000 in the 80s and you're making $1,000 today, your purchasing power has been cut by 60%. And so what's happened is this regressive form of taxation known as inflation, very hard for the average person to understand, because again, if they buy the house for $16,000, it's now worth $500,000. They think they've gotten wealthier, but it's probably worth less in terms of ounces of gold from that period of time. And so the weird part of all this, the governments take advantage of this. People feel left out, and they're super upset. And then the last thing, which is the most important thing, is people are susceptible to charismatic, attention-getting, bombastic leadership that provides panaceas. We're gonna have a ceasefire in the Ukraine-Russian war in 24 hours. In 2016, Trump said he was going to balance the U.S. budget in 4 years. He added $8 trillion to the U.S. budget. Of course, we're 8 days into his new administration. We don't have a ceasefire. So people are susceptible to this. And there's been no real fight on the other side. There's nobody out there from a candidate's perspective or from an advocacy perspective or a leadership perspective explaining this dilemma to people and then providing long-term policy solutions to fix the problem. And so this creates space for the populace in Europe, the populace in Italy, the Brexit movement in the UK, and of course, Donald Trump. So that's the issue, and hopefully we can fix it, but we have to identify what the issue is and then galvanize and provide some level of dissent against it. Because I think it will get ugly, by the way. I mean, it always does. These populist rises, they never end well. Go look throughout economic and political history in Europe or even here in the United States. They don't end well.
Hey, Anthony, I want to ask real quick. Do you have time for 3 more quick questions
Sure.
before we wrap up? Great.
Sure.
Hey, Alfonso, it's good to see you. We'll catch up another day.
Alfonso, good luck with everything, man.
Thank you, Anthony. Appreciate it.
Want to bring in, I believe David is on deck. There he is. David, thank you very much. Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from New York, New York. So nice they named it twice. First of all, I joined this event a little early and I got to see you fixing your hair. And I'm 8 months older than you. I wish I had as much hair as you do. It looks great.
You got to see me fixing my, I just went to the, all right, so just to make a total confession, I just went to the hairstylist and I'm not in love with the pomade she put in. So
I think it looks great.
Hopefully she's not listening to me, but anyway.
So here's my question.
This
Here's
tonight.
my question. When you got involved with the Trump administration in his first administration, did you know what a fascist, autocratic tyrant that he's showing to be in the second administration? Because he's just showing the mean, just a mean man.
So in the first administration, the short answer is no. I remember I was working for Jeb when Jeff came out of the race. I thought it was dutiful to support Donald Trump, who was going to be the Republican nominee. He was showing signs of this sort of crazy, but we all chose to ignore it. And I have made my confession. I've made my apology to people. I think it was ego inducted. I think I put my pride and my ego into my decision making. I wanted to work for the president. Well, the president's crazy. I mean, my wife hates Donald Trump almost as much as Melania hates him, as an example. I mean, way up here. And,
I'm going to get such hate mail on this one.
Well, that's fine. I'm just telling you the facts. And so
all right.
She didn't want me to work for him, but I did it for ego-based reasons. And I made a mistake, but I owned that mistake. And so if you're telling me that what he's doing right now, would I have predicted that? And the short answer is yes. I was saying that for the last year. I said that if you put him back in that office, there'll be a meanness, there'll be a cruelty to him, there'll be things. He's not a well guy from a mental health point of view. He's a mean guy. He flexes on people. He wants to scare people. There's a reason why those billionaires went down to Mar-a-Lago and sat behind his family at the inauguration and gave him tens of millions of dollars in donations. They fear him. They're afraid they're going to go to jail. There's a reason why Google has changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America on Google Maps. They fear Donald Trump and they fear the power of the government against them. And we can't allow ourselves to be in that position, frankly. I mean, that's not a healthy America if we do that. And so we have to find people that can get organized and can push back, All
right. David, thank you. David, thank you. Next up, we've got Steve. Steve, where are you streaming in from? And you're on deck with the Mooch.
I am streaming in from Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay,
great. Bobcat, Ohio University, not the Ohio State University, but Ohio University. Anthony, I've always been a big fan of the presidency, the White House, anything about. Every time I've been to Washington, I just will sit there and stare at the White House. I just think it's fascinating. So I want to ask you a question totally off topic from what we've been talking about so far.
Sure.
I'm curious about the inner workings of the White House itself. I know that you served as the director of communication for a brief period of time. I won't do the joke there and stuff like that. Yeah. But I'm curious, being such a White House and presidency person, I'm curious how that job works. I mean, with whoever is the president at the time, how much interaction does that position have with the presidents? What are kind of your duties overall? I'm just curious inside information how that works.
So let me step back for a second and talk a little bit about the White House. So the White House is effectively a iconic institution controlled by the White House Historical Association. And so there's 3, technically 4 floors, but like at floor 1.5, there's a small office there where the director of White House operations sits to make sure that the plumbing works, to make sure that the roof is fixed, to make sure that things are retaining the splendor of yesteryear. If you go into the Lincoln bedroom, as an example, the bedroom looks very similar to the way it did in the 1850s. But if you walk into the bathroom off the Lincoln bedroom, because it's actually a guest room for the president, the bathroom looks like it would look like in the 1950s, because you may remember this. Harry Truman lived in Blair House, and for 3 years, the White House was gutted and renovated. And so these bathrooms look like your grandma's bathroom, sort of the same tile and the same faucets as they would in the 1950s. And they've been historically maintained to look the way they did when they were restored. And so my thing is, you get badged when you work for the president. I had a blue badge, which gave me access to the White House. That was the first and second floor of the White House, not the upstairs. You had to have a special strip, be a family member or somebody a little bit closer to the president. And I actually had access to the West Wing, where I had an office, and I was in the old executive office building as well, where I had lots of staff that was reporting to me. But what I would say about the White House, if you've never been there, sounds like you may have toured the White House before because you have an interest. It's smaller than you would think. It's not Buckingham Palace. It's not some of the large European heads of state residences. And the Oval Office itself is quite small. The confines inside the West Wing are quite small. But there's a uniqueness to it. And of course, if you're going to get served food in the White House, it's controlled by the United States Navy. The Navy chefs are there. There's a pantry downstairs that the Navy is responsible for. And then, of course, there's a dining area underneath the West Wing where you can go, where the Navy's serving you the food. The executive chefs there's been there for quite some time. And, of course, the president, any time of the day or night, can get whatever he wants in terms of food. Lots of butlers on staff, Secret Service everywhere. On West Avenue, which is the western side of the White House, there's probably 7 or 8 Suburbans that are running 24/7. Maybe Adam has seen that, but
Yep.
the cars are started and they run. And when they start to run out of gas, they replace them. And why are they running? Well, they're running because they don't want to have to start that car in an emergency. So some of the environmentalists are upset about that, but they feel that those seconds or minutes that it would take to get that car started, if they needed to get the president somewhere or somebody was in an emergency situation, they leave those cars running 24/7. So I don't know. It's a little bit of trivia, but is that sort of the answer that you were looking for, sir?
No, absolutely. I have had the opportunity to be in the White House a couple times on tours, and I don't know. For me as a kid, I've always been fascinated about the White House and the office of the presidency and just all those inner working things of just how it functions. So yeah, absolutely.
I'll tell you something Donald Trump said to me, and it's actually, listen, I don't like him. I've been very open about it, but it's somewhat humanizing. I was in the Oval Office with him. It was probably my second day on the job. He was sitting behind the Resolute desk, and I said to him, so you're sitting there, I'm sitting here. I'm a little nervous. Are you a little nervous? Is this intimidating? He was very honest. He said, the first day, I was like, okay, whoa, I'm the president of the United States. It was a little intimidating. And he said, and all of a sudden the phone starts ringing, and the White House protocol officer is telling you have to meet the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom at the North Portico. All of a sudden you start working, and you start to lose that anxiety associated with the office that you're in. And he was right about that, by the way. I was only there for 11 days, but by the third or fourth day, we were so busy that where I was working or what I was doing, you almost lose touch with it because it is surreal in the beginning, but then you're like, oh man, I got a lot of work to do. You don't think about it as much.
Steve, thank you. And Mooch, we've got 2 more questions for you, but I just got to tell you that I remember standing next to you doing a live shot. I was at Fox. I think you were on with CNN, and I stood next to you at the White House out where the reporters all line up to those live shots. Yeah, and 2 of the best privileges and honors I've had in my career, being able to go to the White House on a regular basis when I was covering different presidents, but also walking through the Capitol Rotunda before it had opened, and you can hear your shoes clicking on the marble floor, and you're the only one in there except with the guards. And I was always overwhelmed. I always felt very proud, and I just love being an American walking through the Capitol.
Well, Adam, this is a real reason why we got to take this stuff seriously. And there's a sacredness and there's a fiduciary responsibility to these jobs. I mean, I get, he's going off on Selena Gomez today, and maybe what she did was inappropriate or appropriate. I'm not going to judge it, but it's not your job as president of the United States to go off on a citizen of the country like that. I mean, focus on the job,
Yep. I believe Vazo is standing by. Where are you streaming in from?
Hey there, from Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
How are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you. I've got my husband here too, who's very much into politics and stuff. And so I think he has a...
Oh, way to put me on the spot.
Come on in here. His name is Jason.
How are you, Jason?
Good. How are you, Anthony?
Jason, can you get in front of the camera so we can at least see you? We thought it was going to be
Sure.
Vazo, but go for it, Jason.
Sure. I do have a quick question for you, Anthony. So, at least based on what you would read in the press prior to when you went into the White House, you had a certain reputation for being, I guess you would say, brash or really out there and very outspoken. And now, post you being in the Trump administration and being a pretty ardent critic of Trump and what he does, you seem to have, for lack of a better way to put it, tempered that, at least the reputation that you had prior to that. Do you feel like that experience has changed you personally?
So, listen, it's a really good question, and by the way, I appreciate you asking me that question. So, I feel like what happens to you when you go into politics is you get two-dimensionalized, and so you get caricatured. And when I first started working for Donald Trump, I think Bill Maher called me a Jersey Shore cast member, and somebody said I was a member of the Corleone crime family. And they what they try to do is they try to typecast you, and they try to two-dimensionalize you into something which discredits you, and hopefully if they can dehumanize you or they can attack you personally, they can reduce the audience's ability to hear your intellectual content. And so I think they were very successful at doing that towards me. And I think it's just through repetition. I think people start to realize, well, wait a minute, this guy's been around now for a decade plus, and he's probably not what those people were trying to label him at. There's probably an arbitrage between what they were trying to say he was and what he actually is. And if you look at my educational background or my life experience, I'm obviously not a Jersey Shore cast member, although, when I was a kid, my mother did do my laundry when I was getting tan and going to the gym, but that's a whole separate topic. But the last point I would make, though, the White House firing was brutal for me. Now, you probably can't see it behind me, but there's a cartoon behind me, and that is from the Stephen Colbert Show. And when I went on the show, they were making fun of me every night. They had this cartoon of me, and he was talking in this really harsh New York Italian dialect. And my PR person said, "Don't go on the Colbert Show." And I said, "Well, I'm going on the Colbert Show." And I asked Stephen for one of the cells, and he signed it to my mom. It says on there, "To Marie, thanks for the mooch," or something like that. And so, number one, can't take yourself that seriously. Number two, the firing, I think, made me more empathetic, if I'm being brutally honest, and more psychologically minded. I think that when you go through a burning situation like that, when they set somebody's house on fire in the medieval times, that's where you get the word firing. My house was on fire. And so when your house is on fire, you then start to, it's humbling, but it's also makes you more psychologically minded, and it makes you think about the plight of other people. And I think I'm a better person you may not think it, we don't know each other, but I do. And my wife would say that I'm a better person today, having gone through that experience. And so I think it's a great question. So I think I'm intellectually the same person, but I do think I've been humbled and perhaps a bit wiser and more mature as a result of that experience.
Thank you both for joining us.
Really
Anthony, we got time for one more question,
Yep.
and then we're going to wrap up and give you the last word. But let's bring in the next guest, and I believe his name is Adam. It's a good name to have. Welcome. What's your question for Anthony Scaramucci? I think you need to unmute there, Adam.
you have a unique perspective about the economy, and you have a unique perspective about Trump and being in his White House. What are the watchouts that we should look for? Like if you had your crystal ball in the economy coming up for the next 4 years, and obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but what are you looking for?
I don't have a crystal ball, but there's a little bit of nihilism to Donald Trump. You know, there's a little bit of it's my way or a highway. You know, I'm not comparing him to Adolf Hitler, but I'll just point out that in the book, The Conquerors, Michael Beschloss writes in the book that Hitler was going to have a 1,000-year Reich if he didn't get it. The move that he made was to flood the mines and bring down the electrical grid in Germany. And so his attitude was if it wasn't going to happen well on his watch, he was going to be somewhat destructive. And so Donald Trump is not Adolf Hitler. I'm not trying to compare him to that, but there is a nihilism to his personality. So if it's not working well for him, or, you know, he's mentally unwell. I mean, you just have to look at what he's doing. You have to look at the way he's carrying on the presidency and say, okay, he's obviously not well, and the people are very afraid of him around him, so they're on eggshells when they deal with him. You have to say to yourself, well, what happens if things go really badly? I think he has a tendency to self-destruct, and he'll hurt people around him. He'll hurt the economy, and most people that work for him, by the way, don't come out of it well. He burned through Pence. He burned through Pompeo. He crushed Nikki Haley's career. Jim Mattis doesn't like him. John Kelly doesn't like him. H.R. McMaster just wrote a book explaining the treachery of him. And so, you know, I'm worried that if things are not going well, he goes into a nihilistic streak, which could be harmful to the economy. But what I would say to you about the United States, and this is the brilliance of the country, and this is something I think we should all think about. The United States does better when there are two parties that are strong and there's dissent in the country. The United States does better when we respect the systems and we respect the norms of the checks and balances in the country. We have someone now breaking those norms. I mean, again, starting meme coins or pulling government aid in direct violation of the Constitution, and now he has to be challenged in the court system. Firing inspector generals at various departments. They were put in place to be watchguards and watchdogs for fraud. He's got to give the Congress a 60-day notification before he does it anyway. These are things that are in direct violation of what we stand for. So if he continues on that path, he's going to unsettle the markets, because the markets don't like that level of unpredictability or irrationality. But because it's the United States and we have a very vibrant, very entrepreneurial, very innovative economy, and the United States literally, if you look up the word United States in a thesaurus, it's resilient. And so we'll survive it, but we don't need to be going through this right now, in my opinion. I just think it's an unnecessary thing that we're going through.
That's a good point. Adam, thank you for joining us. Mooch, before I let you go, I want to give you the last word, and I remain grateful that you joined us for the last almost hour to answer these questions.
Pleasure to be on with you. Congratulations on the show, Adam.
Thank you very much. I just got to ask one quick question. Would you ever run for office? It just popped into my head while you were answering Adam's question.
Oh, you know, look, I'm trying to stay married. You know, I'm running for re-election in my marriage, Adam. You know, I mean, you may not remember this, but Deirdre and I were very close to getting divorced when I was in the White House.
I do.
And you know, we patched up our marriage. Thankfully, we're stronger than ever. We got 2 young kids. And so, you know, I'm running for re-election in my marriage, and maybe I'm on a term limit. I don't know. But I don't see myself running for office, because I have found, and this is a terrible thing to say, and I do like some of these politicians, but when you run for office, you start lying, and you lie, and you tell people things that are not true, and you start stretching stories, and you have to do a figure eight. I mean, look, this guy, Dave McCormick, is a good friend of mine. Trump didn't endorse him the first time. He lost to Dr. Oz, and then Fetterman beat Dr. Oz, and Trump endorsed him the second time. But I know David pretty well. I mean, it's not clear to me that a lot of the things that he was saying during that campaign, he's not as congruent with Donald Trump as that campaign would lead you to believe. And I'm not really capable of doing that, frankly. So I don't see myself being a successful candidate. But I do want to end on one thing, if you don't mind, because I think this is an important thing to end on. and it's about the way we see the world. You know, we're living in these 100,000-year-old pieces of machinery that haven't had a software upgrade in 100,000 years. Yet our phones like this, it went from iPhone 1 to iPhone 16 in 15 years, but we're in the same software configuration as Aristotle and even the pharaohs of Egypt thousands of years ago. And so just remember this about yourself. You're thinking about the world linearly. That's how you're designed. But the world around you is moving exponentially. Don't fall into that trap. In the 1840s, Tom Malthus said we were going to run out of food. Population was growing exponentially. We could only grow the food linearly. He left out all the great promise of technology. We have more people. I mean, prior to Ozempic, we have more people dying from obesity-related illnesses than we do to starvation. In the mid-'80s, we were all told in college that we were going to run out of oil. Adam's old enough to remember peak oil theory, as am I. And yet here we are in 2024 due to exploration, fracking, all this new technology, better resource management, more fuel-efficient cars, electric cars, more fuel-efficient boilers in our houses. We have an excess of energy. We may even have an environmental problem associated with it. So don't get overly down. Okay, bet on the economy, bet on human innovation, bet on man and womankind solving these problems. We just got to get to the right political landscape and dial down some of the negative discourse that we're all facing.
That is a great way to end. And you are a voice that needs to be heard. Thank you so much for sharing that on Talkenomics.
It's great to be on with you.
All the best to you. All the best to your wife, and look forward to another discussion.
Thanks, Adam. Congratulations on Talkenomics. I love the title of the show. I have to confess that.
Well, I appreciate it.
Make sure you get that trademark, brother.
I don't know if I can trademark it, but when I got Fox to agree that I owned the rights, I knew we were off and running. So life is good.
All right. Well,
all the best to you.
All right. God bless. Be well.
And a reminder to all of you, thank you for joining us in the stream this evening. But we are live. We live stream every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. We look forward to you coming in and asking your questions, because we are one of those rare programs where you get to ask the questions. Have a good evening.